In this video, I'm going to quickly explain what mastering is. I'll tell you what mastering does, I'll tell you the things that happen during the mastering process, and I'll tell you why it's a good idea to have music mastered before you release it. My name is Josh Giunta, the producer at Love Science Music and the head engineer here at GSI Studios in New York City. Mastering is the absolute last step in the professional recording process. The steps of the recording process are as follows. First you have production, then you have recording, then you have mixing, and then you have mastering. Once a song is mastered, that final file or that final version can be used to upload to streaming services, to be pressed to CDs, to be pressed to vinyl, or to any other type of medium for distribution, digitally or analog. So a mastered version of a song is basically going to do two main things to the final mix of the song. It's going to take the final mix and it's going to make it, one, much louder, and two, much more hi-fi sounding. So let me get into what hi-fi actually means in terms of mastering. Mastering is kind of like squeegeeing a windshield, or it's kind of like restoring an old painting where you see a painting from 500 years ago and then the color gets restored and you get to see the colors as the artist actually painted them. Mastering kind of clears away a lot of the haze from a mix, and it lets you hear much more clearly a lot of the decisions that you made during a mix. So the way a mastering engineer actually accomplishes this is by using these tools. Various types of EQs, various types of compressors, stereo widening dealing with the stereo field and the mono field, saturation, which deals with the overtone spectrum and how the frequencies interact, and limiting. So let me get into what all of those mean. For EQ, in mastering, you EQ in various stages. You don't just use one EQ and do all your work with that one EQ. When I master, I might use anywhere from 3 to 6 different EQs. First type of EQing I'll do will be very broad types of EQing, which basically means that EQ large portions of frequency ranges. So it's very broad EQ, it's not very specific. So for example, to start brightening a song, I might put a shelf on the top end, say from like 2K all the way up to 20K, maybe like half a dB. So that's broad EQing. You're EQing big ranges of frequencies. That's usually my starting point to immediately getting the mix to sound a little bit more clear and honed in. Next, I'll do very specific EQing. In this stage, I'm either boosting very specific frequencies that sound good or that need to be exaggerated, such as the lead vocal or the kick drum or the snare drum, or I'm reducing frequencies that stick out to me as being too heavy, too exaggerated, or maybe unintentionally present in the mix. So for example, if I feel like the lead vocal needs to pop a little bit more in this master, what I would do is I would do a frequency sweep throughout the song, and I would find the various frequency points where the vocals kind of stick out the most. Usually you'll find them in 3 or 4 different places for one voice. So what I might do is boost in those specific frequencies, like maybe you'll hear something at 2K and then at 5,000 and then another at say 500, and you boost all those a tiny bit. Mastering is all about subtlety. I never do huge giant moves of EQ. I do super small moves of EQ, and I might do them over the course of a few different EQs or a few different plugins. So it's kind of cumulative. The master ends up sounding a lot different than the mix, but only through very slight incremental changes throughout the process. The third type of EQ that's really typical in mastering is called mid-side EQ. That basically allows you to EQ only what's in the middle separately from what's only on the sides of a mix, which basically means I can EQ everything that was panned mono in a mix, panned dead center. I EQ only that middle part of the mix. So a lot of things that are typically panned dead center of the mix would be the vocals, the lead vocal that is, the kick drum, the snare drum, the bass. So if I want to bump the bass and make the bass really cut and have a nice fat low end, I would usually do that from EQing in the middle. When you're EQing the sides, you're going to EQ only the things that are panned to the sides of the mix. Like stereo delays, stereo reverbs are panned way out wide, backing vocals are panned out wide. If you have keys that are recorded stereo, drum overheads might get panned side. A stereo EQ lets you handle the EQ and frequencies of only those things panned left and right. There's a lot of compression that happens in the mastering process as well, and you can compress for different reasons. One reason would be to control peaks. If there's certain parts of the song where, say, some of the drum hits or some of the vocals kind of pop out and stick out as being too loud, you might want to control those peaks of the mix. And also, generally, compression can add a little bit of hype and add kind of density to a mix and add excitement. It kind of makes it sound like it's more in your face. It sounds like you're closer to it when you compress it. Also, a lot of times in mastering, when you compress an entire mix, what happens is that the compression actually makes the sides of the mix sound a lot more present. In the mastering process, what it does is it compresses those sides. It compresses the left channel, the right channel. So it's actually going to make a lot of those things that are panned kind of come more present, more up front in the mix. Sometimes mastering engineers use tools called saturators. And saturation basically adds more like weight and more like density and more like meat to a mix. If something sounds thin, then you basically want to make it sound heavier and richer and lusher. Saturation is the way to get there. Saturation deals with the meat of a mix and the beef. You want to get like the overtones and the frequencies to kind of pop more. And one of the most crucial things that a master does to a mix is it gets the mix up to the correct volume that's needed. Loudness. Basically, any song that you're able to listen to that's been released either from streaming services like Spotify or from CD, it all plays at a certain volume. And if you compare your final mix to that volume of music that's already been released, you're going to notice that your mixes are going to sound way softer than music that's been mastered. So that's part of what mastering does, is it brings up the level of your mix to an acceptable volume for streaming services and for printing physical music. As you do those previous things that I said, like EQ and compress and saturation, all those little steps are going to slowly raise the volume of the song step by step. And then once you get towards the end of the mastering process, you basically decide the final loudness of the master. And this can be accomplished by using tools that are called limiters. And what a limiter does is it basically brings up the level of the entire track. And it also basically puts a ceiling at how hot, how loud a signal can get. So a limiter makes sure that it's making the track as loud as possible, but it also instills a ceiling where the peaks of the song cannot break through that level, so that your song doesn't distort and sound bad and peak on people's stereo systems. And what's really interesting is that all the different streaming services and online platforms kind of have their own range of what they find acceptable, an acceptable range of loudness for the music that they accept from you or from your mastering engineer. Currently, one of the most popular scales of measuring loudness is called the LUFS scale. So the LUFS scale basically is a measurement of perceived loudness of the ear. Some streaming platforms such as Spotify ask for a specific range on the LUFS scale for how loud they want their submissions to be for their service. So it's the mastering engineer's job to get the song up to that volume in the target range of loudness for what Spotify accepts. So if you've ever wondered, do I need to get my music mastered? The answer is yes, if you want your music to sound competitive with other modern records that are coming out on the platforms that you want to release on. You should know that every major artist, every major record label, they're all sending the tracks out to mastering engineers, to guys who just master records. And part of the reason why those albums sound so great and sound so clean and sound the way they do is because of the mastering. It's an integral part of the music making studio process. And the mastering process can be really subtle or it can be really extreme. It really depends totally on the mix that you're given, the mix that you need to master. If a mix is kind of trash and it doesn't really sound that good and it goes to a mastering engineer, the mastering engineer might need to do a whole lot to get it up to sound competitive and to his ears sound a way that sounds good. On the other hand, a mix that sounds amazing and sounds loud and sounds full and sounds really complete, the mastering engineer might not need to do all that much to it to get it to have that final gloss and final volume. One other thing that mastering does is if you have an album or an EP or a group of songs, sometimes the songs will sound slightly different if they were mixed by different people, produced by different people, recorded and worked on in different studios. The mastering engineer listens to all those songs kind of back to back, all those finished versions, and his or her job is to basically tone match all the songs so that when you listen to the album, it doesn't sound like they're recorded in different places. They all have a cohesive tone, a cohesive character, and cohesive volume and sonic. So drop me a comment if you have any questions for me about mastering, or if you want me to make videos about how to master in the studio. I'd be happy to do that. Check me out on all platforms, Love Science Music.